The cold bit through Leo's thin jacket as he walked down Sunset Boulevard. 3 months on the streets of Los Angeles had taught him which coffee shops let you sit for hours with one small cup, which public bathrooms were usually clean, and which shelter had the shortest lines on Tuesday nights. What it hadn't taught him was how to stop feeling the sting when people crossed the street to avoid him, or clutched their bags tighter as he passed. Leo hadn't always lived this way. Just last year, he had an apartment with a view of the city, a job he loved as a digital artist at a marketing firm, and enough savings to occasionally splurge on concert tickets or nice dinners. Then came the company downsizing, the desperate job search, the dwindling bank account, and finally the eviction notice. Now his world was contained in the backpack he never let out of his sight. Today felt different, though. Leo had managed to get a day's work helping unload trucks at a warehouse. The manager had paid him in cash, $85 that felt like a fortune after weeks of scraping by. Leo tucked most of it into his sock, his makeshift safe, but kept $20 out. Today he decided he would eat a real meal at a real table. He chose a diner called Mel's, a place that looked casual enough that he wouldn't stand out too badly. Before going in, Leo tried his best to make himself presentable. He smoothed down his dark curly hair, wiped his face with a dampened napkin he'd saved from a fast food place, and brushed off his jeans. His clothes weren't filthy. He made regular trips to a laundromat when he could afford it, but they were worn and had that lived-in look that screamed homeless to anyone paying attention. Taking a deep breath, Leo pushed open the door to Mel's. A bell jingled cheerfully above him, and warm air carrying the smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around him like a hug. For a moment, he just stood there, savoring the sensation. "Table for one?" the hostess asked, her smile fading slightly as she took in his appearance. "Yes, please," Leo said, trying to sound confident. She hesitated, glancing around at the half-full diner before leading him to a small table in the back corner, far from the window seats where couples chatted over pancakes, and business people tapped on laptops while sipping coffee. "Your server will be right with you," she said, dropping a menu on the table and walking away quickly. Leo didn't mind the corner table. It was actually perfect, quiet, away from judging eyes, and still warm. He opened the menu and immediately felt a wave of hunger as he looked at the pictures of fluffy omelets and golden French toast. He decided on the breakfast special: eggs, bacon, toast, and coffee for $12.99. It would leave him enough for a small tip. While waiting, Leo took out his prized possession, a slightly cracked tablet he kept charged at the public library. On it was his entire portfolio of digital art, years of work that showcased his talent for creating eye-catching graphics and animations. Sometimes when he felt particularly low, he would look through his old projects to remind himself that he was still the same person with the same skills, even if his circumstances had changed. He was so absorbed in flipping through his artwork that he didn't notice the waiter approaching until the man cleared his throat loudly. Leo looked up to find a tall guy with slicked back hair and a name tag reading Rick, staring down at him with obvious distaste. "Can I help you?" Rick asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "Yes, I'd like the breakfast special, please, and coffee," Leo said. Rick's eyes narrowed as he took in Leo's worn clothes, the backpack tucked protectively between his feet, and the tablet that had seen better days. "How will you be paying for that?" he asked. Leo felt his face grow hot. "Cash," he said, reaching into his pocket to show the $20 bill as proof. Instead of writing down the order, Rick crossed his arms. "Look," he said, his voice rising enough that nearby diners turned to look. "We don't serve your kind here." The words hit Leo like a physical blow. He'd faced plenty of rejection over the past few months, but something about sitting in this warm diner, just trying to have a normal meal like everyone else, made this particular rejection cut deeper. "My kind?" Leo repeated quietly. "You know what I mean," Rick said, gesturing vaguely at all of Leo. "We get your type in here, using our bathrooms, bothering the customers, ordering the cheapest thing on the menu and sitting for hours. The boss doesn't want it, so why don't you just move along before I have to call someone?" Leo felt every eye in the place on him, An older couple at a nearby table whispered to each other. A woman sitting alone quickly looked down at her phone. No one spoke up. With shaking hands, Leo began to gather his things. He'd learned that arguing never helped in these situations. Better to just go, to swallow the humiliation and move on. As he stood up, he accidentally knocked his water glass, sending it spilling across the table. This small disaster only added to his shame as Rick made an exaggerated sound of annoyance. "Sorry," Leo muttered, using his napkin to mop up the spill. "Just leave it," Rick snapped. "I'll clean up your mess." What neither Leo nor Rick noticed was that 3 booths away, partially hidden by a large menu and a baseball cap pulled low, sat Keanu Reeves. The actor had slipped into the diner hoping for a quiet cup of coffee before heading to set. He wasn't trying to hide exactly, but experience had taught him that keeping a low profile often allowed him the simple pleasure of eating in peace. Keanu had been adding sugar to his coffee when he overheard the exchange. He watched as the waiter publicly shamed the young man, noting how no one in the diner intervened. He saw the quiet dignity with which the young man handled the humiliation, attempting to clean up his spilled water even as he was being thrown out. Something about the scene struck Keanu deeply. Perhaps it was the callousness of the waiter, or the way the other customers looked away pretending not to notice. Or maybe it was the glimpse he'd caught of the young man's tablet, the brief flash of colorful digital artwork that suggested this was someone with talent and passion, reduced in others' eyes to nothing more than his current circumstances. As Leo shouldered his backpack and headed toward the door, Keanu made a decision. He'd spent much of his career avoiding the spotlight in his personal life, preferring to keep his acts of kindness private. He gave generously to children's hospitals and cancer research, often anonymously. He was known on film sets for his consideration of crew members, learning everyone's names and treating all with equal respect. But he typically avoided public scenes. Today would be different. Keanu slid out of his booth, leaving enough cash to cover his coffee and a generous tip. He moved with the quiet confidence that characterized his off-screen presence, reaching the door just as Leo was about to push it open and step back into the cold. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly. Leo turned, his eyes widening slightly as recognition dawned. Even through the baseball cap and casual clothes, it was impossible not to recognize one of the most famous actors in the world. But being homeless had taught Leo another lesson. Celebrities were just people, and most people wanted nothing to do with him. "Sorry," Leo mumbled, assuming he was somehow in the famous actor's way. "No, please," Keanu said, his voice just loud enough for those nearest to hear. "I was wondering if you'd join me for breakfast. My table's over there." He gestured toward his booth. The diner had gone completely silent. Rick the waiter stood frozen, coffee pot in hand, his face draining of color as he realized who had witnessed his behavior. The hostess who had seated Leo in the corner was suddenly very interested in straightening menus that didn't need straightening. Leo stood there, backpack clutched to his chest, unable to process what was happening. Was Keanu Reeves, the John Wick Matrix speed Keanu Reeves, asking him to have breakfast? Why would he do that? Was this some kind of joke? As if reading his thoughts, Keanu added quietly, "I'd really appreciate the company. And I think we both could use some breakfast, right?" There was a gentleness in his voice that convinced Leo this wasn't a prank or a publicity stunt. With a small nod, he followed Keanu back to his booth, aware of the whispers that followed them and the smartphones that were suddenly out, discreetly, and not so discreetly, capturing the moment. As they settled into the booth, Keanu flagged down a different server, not Rick, and ordered 2 breakfast specials. Then he turned to Leo with a small smile. "I'm Keanu," he said, as if Leo or anyone else might not know. "I'm Leo," came the reply, his voice still unsteady from the emotional whiplash of the last 5 minutes. "Nice to meet you, Leo," Keanu said, offering his hand across the table. "Now tell me about that artwork I saw on your tablet. It looked interesting." The diner buzzed with whispers as Leo sat across from Keanu Reeves. People pretended not to stare, but phone cameras peeked over booth dividers and from behind menus. Leo shifted uncomfortably, feeling out of place in his worn clothes. Don't worry about them, Keanu said quietly, nodding toward the onlookers. They'll find something else interesting in about 5 minutes. Leo's hands fidgeted with the edge of the table. I don't understand why you're doing this. Keanu took a sip of his coffee before answering. Because what happened wasn't right. And sometimes it's easier for people like me to point that out than for people in your situation. Before Leo could respond, a different server approached their table. This one, a middle-aged woman with a nameplate reading Darlene, smiled warmly at them both. 2 breakfast specials coming right up, she said, placing fresh cups of coffee in front of them. And the manager wants you to know these are on the house. Keanu shook his head. That's not necessary. I'm happy to pay. No, he insists, Darlene said, lowering her voice. And between you and me, Rick's getting a talking to in the back right now. After she left, Leo stared into his coffee cup. They wouldn't even have served me if you hadn't stepped in. I know, Keanu said. That's the problem. A tall man in a button-up shirt and tie hurried over to their table, his face flushed. Mr. Reeves, I'm Tony, the manager. I want to personally apologize for what happened. This isn't how we do business here. I'm not the one who deserves an apology, Keanu said, gesturing toward Leo. Tony turned to Leo, his smile strained. Of course, sir, I'm very sorry for the misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Leo said quietly. Your waiter told me you don't serve my kind here. He was pretty clear about that. Tony's face reddened further. That's absolutely not our policy. Rick was completely out of line, and I assure you he's being dealt with. Being dealt with because Keanu Reeves saw what happened, Leo pointed out. If he wasn't here, you'd have let Rick throw me out, right? The manager stammered. I wasn't aware of the situation until just now. That's the point, Keanu interjected. People need to be aware, not just when celebrities are watching. Tony nodded vigorously. Yes, absolutely, you're completely right, Mr. Reeves, and again, we're so sorry. He backed away, heading toward the kitchen where raised voices could be heard. Leo looked at Keanu with newfound respect. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Keanu replied simply. Now, you were going to tell me about your artwork. Surprised by the change of subject, Leo hesitated before pulling out his tablet. It's nothing special, just some digital designs I used to make. Used to? Keanu asked, accepting the tablet as Leo handed it over. Leo watched nervously as Keanu swiped through his portfolio. The work represented years of his life, projects for tech startups and entertainment companies, logo designs and animation storyboards. These are really good, Keanu said, studying a vibrant animation sequence Leo had created for a music video. Why did you stop? Lost my job when my company downsized, couldn't find another one fast enough to keep paying rent. Leo shrugged, trying to make it sound matter-of-fact rather than the devastating blow it had been. There are a lot of digital artists in LA. Their breakfast arrived, steaming plates of eggs, bacon, and toast. Leo tried not to eat too quickly, though the smell made his stomach growl audibly. Keanu pretended not to notice, continuing to look through Leo's work while taking occasional bites of his own food. This one, Keanu said, stopping on a particular design. Tell me about this. It was one of Leo's favorite pieces, a poster he does, designed for an independent film festival, featuring an intricate cityscape that transformed into a film reel when viewed from a distance. That was for the Silver Lake Film Festival last year, Leo explained, his voice warming with pride despite himself. They wanted something that captured both the local neighborhood feel and the cinematic aspect. It won a regional design award. I can see why, Keanu said. There's something about the perspective that pulls you in, makes you see different things depending on how you look at it. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily. Leo found himself talking about his background. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, studying graphic design in college, moving to LA with big dreams 6 years ago. He'd had success at first, landing a job at a growing marketing firm, working his way up from junior designer to project lead. Then the company lost some big clients and suddenly they needed to cut staff, Leo explained. I was one of the last hired, so I was one of the first to go. And no safety net? Keanu asked. Leo shook his head. I had some savings, but LA rent eats through money pretty quick. I tried freelancing, but without a permanent address or reliable internet. He trailed off with a shrug. After 3 months without steady work, I couldn't make rent. After that, things just kept getting worse. By now, most of the other diners had finished taking surreptitious photos and had returned to their own meals, though occasional glances still came their way. How long have you been on the streets? Keanu asked. 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, Leo answered without hesitation. Not that I'm counting. Keanu's smile was gentle. But you are. Yeah. Leo pushed his empty plate away. Every day I think maybe it's the day something changes. And today? Keanu asked. Leo laughed softly. Today is definitely different. It's not every day you get rescued by John Wick. Keanu chuckled. I prefer to think of it as Neo stepping in, less violent that way. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the kitchen. Rick the waiter was marching toward the exit, his face twisted with anger, his apron crumpled in his hand. This is bull, he shouted at Tony the manager, who followed behind him. You can't fire me for following the policy you set. The diner went silent again. Tony's face drained of color. Rick, that's not... Don't act like you didn't tell us all last month to discourage loiterers because they were bad for business. Rick continued, making air quotes around the word loiterers. You specifically said not to serve homeless people because they drive away the regular customers. From across the room, Leo and Keanu watched the scene unfold. Tony tried to hustle Rick toward the door, but the waiter wasn't finished. Everyone here knows it's true, Rick said, looking around the diner for support. When none came, he jabbed a finger toward Leo. That guy would never have gotten service if Mr. Hollywood wasn't with him. You're all just hypocrites. With that final accusation, Rick stormed out, letting the door slam behind him. Tony stood frozen for a moment before turning to face the silent diner full of staring customers. He straightened his tie nervously. I apologize for that outburst, he said, loudly. Rick has been under a lot of personal stress lately, and clearly it affected his judgment. Of course, all paying customers are welcome at Mel's. Leo felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Rick had been telling the truth. He could see it in Tony's evasive eyes and forced smile. The waiter had just been following orders. In a strange way, Leo almost respected Rick's angry honesty more than Tony's smooth lies. Keanu seemed to read his thoughts. Sometimes people hide ugly truths behind polite smiles, he said quietly, and sometimes they expose those truths without meaning to, Leo added. Keanu nodded, then pulled out his phone and checked the time. I need to get to set soon, he said. But before I go, I want to ask you something. Leo braced himself. Often, when people learned about his situation, they offered well-meaning but unhelpful advice. Have you tried this shelter, applied for that program, called this agency? As if he hadn't already explored every option. Instead, Keanu surprised him. Again. Are you still looking for design work? Of course, Leo said. That's all I want. A chance to work again. To use my skills. Keanu tapped on his phone for a moment, then turned it around to show Leo. On the screen was an email draft addressed to someone named Grace Lynn, with the subject line, Talented Designer to Consider. Grace is the marketing director for a film I'm working on, Keanu explained. They're looking for freelance designers for the promotional materials. Would it be okay if I sent her your contact information and a few samples of your work? Leo stared at the phone, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Yes, of course, but I don't have a phone number right now, or a proper email I can check regularly. Keanu considered this. Where can you be reached? I use the computers at the public library on 5th Street, Leo said. I can check email there, and... He hesitated, embarrassed. I sometimes sleep in the park across from there, if someone needed to find me. Without judgment, Keanu nodded and added this information to the email. I can't promise anything, he warned. But Grace is good people. She'll look at your work fairly. That's all I've ever wanted, Leo said. A fair chance. As they prepared to leave, Leo noticed Tony hovering nearby, clearly wanting to speak with Keanu again. The actor pointedly ignored him, instead focusing on helping Leo gather his things. Outside the diner, the morning had warmed slightly, though the Los Angeles winter still held a chill. Keanu flagged down his waiting car, then turned to Leo. You need a ride somewhere, Cons? He asked. Leo shook his head. The library's not far. I'll head there to check email. Keanu hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Leo immediately put his hands up. I don't want your money, he said firmly. I know, Keanu replied, but you'll need a decent meal tonight too, and maybe a place to stay while you wait to hear from Grace. He held out $300 bills. Think of it as an advance on your future work. Leo wavered, pride battling with practicality. $300 could get him a cheap motel room for a few nights, a chance to shower properly and get some real rest before any potential interview. Take it, Keanu encouraged, and then pass it on someday when you can. Finally, Leo accepted the money with a nod of thanks. As Keanu's car pulled away, Leo stood on the sidewalk, the events of the morning feeling dreamlike. He looked back at the diner, where Tony was watching from the window, with a small, defiant smile. Leo turned and walked toward the library, his tablet tucked safely in his backpack, and for the first time in months, a flicker of hope warming his chest. Leo sat at a computer terminal in the public library, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He'd been checking his email every 15 minutes since arriving 3 hours ago. The librarian at the front desk, a kind woman named Doris who had long since figured out Leo's situation, had bent the rules to let him stay past the usual 1-hour computer limit. The library was quiet on this weekday afternoon, and she'd whispered that he could stay until closing as long as no one else needed the terminal. Refreshing the page won't make an email arrive any faster, Doris said gently as she walked by with a cart of books. Leo smiled sheepishly. I know. It's just, this could change everything. He hadn't told Doris about meeting Keanu Reeves. It sounded too far-fetched, like something a homeless person would make up to seem important. But he had told her he might be hearing about a job opportunity, and that was enough to earn her sympathy. Did you try that shelter on 8th I told you about? She asked. They have job placement services too. I'll check it out tomorrow, Leo promised, though they both knew he probably wouldn't. The shelter was always full, with a waiting list weeks long, and the job placement services typically led to minimum wage positions far below his skill level. Still, Leo appreciated Doris's concern. In a world where most people pretended not to see him, her small kindnesses meant a lot. When the library's ancient computer finally refreshed again, a new message appeared in the free email account Leo had set up months ago. The sender was Grace Lynn, with the subject line, Design Portfolio Review. Leo's heart jumped to his throat. It came, he whispered to himself, suddenly afraid to open it. What if she hated his work? What if Keanu was just being nice, and this Grace person was annoyed at having to humor a famous actor's charity case? Leo took a deep breath and clicked on the email. Dear Mr. Chen, Keanu Reeves shared some samples of your design work with me this morning. I'm impressed by your portfolio, particularly the Silver Lake Film Festival poster and the animated sequence for Trance Music Festival. Your style aligns well with the aesthetic we're developing for our current project. I'd like to discuss the possibility of commissioning some preliminary concept art for our marketing campaign. Are you available for a video call tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss details? Please let me know if this works for your schedule. Best regards. Grace Lynn, Marketing Director, Arch Studios. Leo read the email 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. She liked his work. She wanted to talk about hiring him. Tomorrow. A wave of panic followed the initial elation. A video call? How was he supposed to manage that? He looked down at his clothes, which were the best he had but still showed obvious signs of wear. And where would he even take the call? The library didn't allow video chats, and he couldn't exactly sit on a park bench for a professional meeting. The $300 Keanu had given him suddenly felt like the most important money he'd ever held. With it, he could get a cheap motel room for a night or two, clean up properly, and maybe even buy a new shirt. It would mean spending almost everything. But if it led to actual work... Good news? Doris asked, noticing his expression. I think so, Leo said. I have a job interview tomorrow, a video call. Doris beamed. That's wonderful. What's the position? Freelance design work for a film studio, Leo said, still stunned by the development. But I need a place with internet for the call. Doris thought for a moment. You know, my nephew works at the Sunrise Motel on Wilshire. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and they have decent Wi-Fi. I could call him, see if he can give you a discount. 30 minutes later, Leo had responded to Grace's email confirming the meeting time and was walking toward the Sunrise Motel with directions from Doris. Thanks to her nephew, he'd secured a room for 2 nights at a reduced rate of $89 per night, leaving him with enough money for some new clothes and food. The motel was exactly as Doris had described, not fancy but clean. The room had a bed with slightly scratchy sheets, a small bathroom with a shower that worked, and most importantly, reliable Wi-Fi. Leo set his backpack down carefully and looked around the modest space that, after months of sleeping in shelters and parks, felt like absolute luxury. First things first, a shower. Leo stood under the hot water for a long time, letting it wash away months of quick, lukewarm rinses in public facilities. He washed his hair twice with the small complimentary shampoo, scrubbed his skin until it was pink, and emerged feeling like a new person. Wrapped in a towel, he assessed his few possessions. His jeans could pass with a proper washing in the sink. His shoes were worn but acceptable, but his shirts were all too casual or too worn for a professional meeting, even a virtual one. After hand-washing his jeans and hanging them to dry, Leo ventured out to a nearby discount clothing store. He found a simple light blue button-down shirt on clearance for $19.99 and a pack of new underwear and socks. On the way back, he stopped at a fast food restaurant and treated himself to a proper meal, savoring each bite. Back in the motel room, Leo used the remaining evening hours to prepare for the interview. He connected to the Wi-Fi and researched Art Studios, learning it was a mid-sized production company known for thoughtful indie films and the occasional mainstream success. Their current project, the one Keanu was involved with, was an action thriller with philosophical undertones scheduled for release next year. Leo also refreshed his knowledge of current design trends, looking at recent successful marketing campaigns for similar films. He made notes on his tablet, sketching a few rough ideas that might align with what Grace was looking for. As night fell, Leo lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, he wasn't worried about staying safe or finding his next meal or avoiding the police who sometimes cleared homeless people from public areas. Instead, his mind was full of creative possibilities, color palettes, and typography choices. He fell asleep thinking about design, not survival. Morning came, and with it, a rush of nervous energy. Leo put on his new shirt and freshly washed. Jeans combed his hair neatly and set up his tablet on the small desk in the corner of the room. He positioned himself so the blank wall was behind him rather than the bed, creating the most professional background possible. At 9:55 a.m., he opened the video conferencing link Grace had sent. His heart pounded as he waited, rehearsing his introduction in his head. At exactly 10, the call connected, and Grace Lynn's face appeared on screen. She was a woman in her 40s with stylish glasses and a professional but friendly demeanor. "Mr. Chen, thank you for joining me this morning," she said with a smile. "Thank you for the opportunity," Leo replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "And please call me Leo." "Leo it is," Grace said. "I have to say, when Keanu sent me your portfolio, I was impressed. We don't often find designers with your combination of technical skill and artistic vision." Leo felt warmth spread through his chest at the compliment. "Thank you, that means a lot." "Keanu mentioned you've been between jobs recently," Grace continued diplomatically. not referencing his homelessness directly. But talent like yours shouldn't go to waste. Let me tell you what we're looking for. For the next half hour, Grace outlined the project, a film called Threshold, starring Keanu as a physicist who discovers a way to see alternate timelines. The marketing campaign needed to capture the film's blend of science fiction, philosophical depth, and human emotion. We need initial concept designs for the poster, social media assets, and potentially some motion graphics for the trailer, Grace explained. We'd start with a 2-week contract for conceptual work, with the possibility of extending for the full campaign if the initial concepts are approved by the director. That sounds perfect, Leo said, trying not to sound too eager. I have some preliminary thoughts based on what you've described. Using his tablet, he shared some of the rough sketches he'd made the night before, playing with themes of parallel lines, fractured images, and reflections to represent the alternate timelines. Concept. Grace's eyes lit up. These are exactly the kind of directions we want to explore. I especially like this one with the fragmented mirror effect. By the end of the call, they had agreed on terms. A 2-week contract at a very fair rate, with the first payment to be advanced immediately so Leo could purchase any software or materials he needed. Grace also mentioned that if things went well, there could be opportunities for other projects with the studio. One more thing, Grace said before ending the call. Keanu mentioned you might need a workspace. Our studio has a small desk you could use during this project if that would be helpful. Nothing fancy, but it has high-speed internet and all the software you might need. Leo swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. A workspace, a place to go every day to create, to be professional again. It was more than he'd dared to hope for. That would be extremely helpful, he managed to say. Thank you. After the call ended, Leo sat motionless for several minutes, letting the reality sink in. He had a job, a real job using his skills. It might only be for 2 weeks, but it was a start, a foot back in the door of the life he'd lost. He reached for his tablet and opened a new project file. Ideas were already flowing, images and concepts taking shape in his mind. For the first time in months, he felt like himself again. Not a homeless person, not a charity case, but Leo Chen, digital artist. A knock at the door startled him from his creative flow. Confused, he opened it to find a delivery person holding a large package. Delivery for Leo Chen? The courier said, checking his digital pad. That's me, Leo said, bewildered. He hadn't ordered anything. Sign here, please. Leo signed and accepted the heavy box, bringing it inside. There was no sender information on the outside, just his name and the motel address. He opened it carefully to find a brand new laptop computer, a professional drawing tablet, and a note written on thick stationery. Tools of the trade. Looking forward to seeing what you create. Leo ran his fingers over the high-end equipment in disbelief. The laptop alone cost more than he would have made in 2 weeks at his old job. The drawing tablet was the professional model he'd always wanted but could never justify buying. Tears welled in his eyes as he set up the new equipment on the small motel desk. From losing everything to this moment, all because someone had seen him as a person worth helping, worth believing in. He opened the laptop, powered up the drawing tablet, and began to work, his hands moving with newfound purpose. Outside, the Los Angeles sun climbed higher in the sky, its light spilling through the thin curtains and across his shoulders as he leaned forward, creating again. 1 week later, Leo sat at a small desk in the corner of Arch Studios' marketing department. The space was everything Grace had promised. Nothing fancy, just a functional workstation with a powerful computer, industry-standard software, and high-speed internet. For Leo, it was paradise. The 2-week contract had officially started 5 days ago, when Leo had arrived at the studio carrying his backpack and the laptop and drawing tablet Keanu had given him. Grace had greeted him warmly, introduced him to the small marketing team, and shown him to his workspace. No one mentioned his previous circumstances or treated him differently. Here he was just a freelance designer brought in for a specific project. How's it coming along? Grace asked, stopping by his desk with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Leo, who accepted it gratefully. "Really well, I think," he replied, turning his monitor so she could see the series of poster concepts he'd been developing. "I've been playing with the idea of time as a visual element, how one moment can branch into multiple possibilities." On screen, several variations of a movie poster showed Keanu's character at a pivotal moment, with ghostly images of alternate versions of himself branching off in different directions. Each version used different color schemes and typography, but all shared the same core concept. Grace studied them with a critical eye. "These are strong. I especially like this one," she said, pointing to a design where the alternate versions were shown as reflections in fractured glass. "It captures the emotional weight of the story, not just the sci-fi elements." "That's my favorite too," Leo admitted. "I wanted to show that these aren't just abstract timelines. They're real choices with real consequences for the character. The director's coming in tomorrow to review these." "I think he's going to be impressed," Grace said, giving Leo's shoulder a quick, encouraging squeeze. After she left, Leo took a sip of coffee and looked around the office. The marketing team was small but talented, a mix of veterans and younger designers who had all made him feel welcome. They didn't know the full story of how he'd connected with Keanu, just that the actor had recommended his work. Leo preferred it that way. He wanted to be judged on his talent, not his backstory. During lunch breaks, Leo had started joining a few of the team members at a small Thai restaurant around the corner. Today, he sat with Raj, one of the graphic designers, and Penny, a social media coordinator. "So you worked on the Silver Lake Film Festival campaign?" Penny asked, using chopsticks to expertly pick up a piece of chicken. "That was gorgeous work." "Thanks," Leo said, still getting used to casual professional conversation again. "It was one of my favorite projects at my old company." "What happened there?" Raj asked. "Why'd you leave?" Leo hesitated. He'd been dreading this inevitable question. "Downsizing," he said simply. "Budget cuts." "That sucks," Penny said sympathetically. "This industry can be brutal sometimes." "It worked out, though," Leo said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "I probably wouldn't have ended up here otherwise." "Speaking of here," Raj lowered his voice. "Is it true you're working directly with Keanu on this project?" Grace mentioned he specifically requested to see your concepts. I guess so," Leo said, trying to sound casual. "We've only met briefly." It wasn't exactly a lie. Their breakfast at the diner had been brief in the grand scheme of things. "He's coming in tomorrow for the director's meeting," Penny said excitedly. "Everyone says he's the nicest celebrity to work with. No ego at all." Leo nodded, thinking about the expensive equipment currently sitting in his new apartment, a small studio he'd managed to rent with the advance from the contract and some help from Grace, who had connected him with a landlord willing to be flexible about rental history. "Yeah, he seems like a good guy." After lunch, Leo returned to his desk to make final adjustments to his designs before tomorrow's presentation. He'd been working for hours when a text message arrived on his new phone, another necessity he'd been able to afford with his advance. "How's it going?" Leo stared at the message. He'd given his new number to Grace but hadn't expected Keanu to use it. They hadn't spoken since that morning at the diner, though the equipment delivery had made it clear the actor was still looking out for him. "Really well. Working on concepts for tomorrow's meeting. Thank you again for everything." The reply came quickly. "Just open the door. You did the rest. See you tomorrow." Leo smiled and tucked the phone away, returning to his designs with renewed energy. By the time everyone else had left for the day, he had finalized 6 distinct concepts, each exploring different visual approaches to the film's themes. Grace had told him he didn't need to attend the director's meeting. It was normal for freelancers to submit their work without being present for high-level discussions. But Leo had asked to be there. He wanted to present his own ideas, to be part of the conversation. After spending so long feeling invisible, he needed to be in the room. The next morning, Leo arrived at the studio an hour early, dressed in new clothes he'd purchased for the occasion, dark jeans, a crisp button-down shirt, and a simple blazer that made him look professional without seeming like he was trying too hard. He reviewed his presentation one last time, rehearsing what he would say about each concept. People began filtering into the conference room around 9:30. Leo recognized the film's director, Alan Wong, from his research, a respected filmmaker known for visually striking movies with emotional depth. Various executives and department heads followed, along with Grace, who gave Leo an encouraging smile. Keanu was the last to arrive, slipping in quietly and taking a seat at the far end of the table. He nodded at Leo, a small gesture that no one else seemed to notice. "Let's get started," Alan said after introductions were complete. "I understand we have some initial marketing concepts to review." Grace stood. "Yes, we brought in a freelance designer with a fresh perspective for this campaign. Leo, would you like to walk us through your concepts?" Leo took a deep breath and stood up. "Thank you for this opportunity," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "For a film about alternate timelines and choices, I wanted to create visuals that capture both the sci-fi concept and the human element at the core of the story." He clicked through his designs, explaining the thinking behind each one. As he spoke, he grew more confident, pointing out how the typography echoed the theme of fragmentation, how the color palette shifted from cool blues in the scientific versions to warmer tones in the more emotional concepts. The room was silent when he finished. Leo's heart pounded in his chest. Had he misread the situation? Were his ideas too abstract, too artistic for a commercial film? Alan leaned forward. "These are exceptional," he said finally. "Especially this one." He pointed to the concept with the fractured reflections, the same one Grace had preferred. "It captures exactly what I'm trying to do with this film. It's not just about the scientific concept of multiple timelines. It's about the weight of choices, how each decision creates or destroys possible futures." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. The marketing executives began discussing how the concept could be extended across different platforms: social media, trailers, merchandise. "What do you think, Keanu?" Alan asked suddenly. "You're the face of this campaign after all." All eyes turned to Keanu, who had been quietly observing the discussion. "I think Leo has created something special here," he said. "Something that respects the audience's intelligence while still being visually striking. I'm particularly drawn to how he's used reflection and fragmentation as visual metaphors." He looked directly at Leo. "It's rare to see concept art that captures the emotional core of a film so perfectly." The meeting continued, with various details being discussed and minor adjustments suggested. When it ended, people filed out, many stopping to congratulate Leo on his work. Alan, the director, lingered behind. "Grace tells me you're only on a 2-week contract," he said to Leo. "Yes, for the initial concepts," Leo confirmed, trying not to show his anxiety about what would happen when those 2 weeks ended. Alan exchanged a look with Grace. "I'd like to extend that. I want you involved through the entire marketing campaign. Posters, trailers, social media, all of it. Your vision aligns perfectly with what I want for this film." Leo struggled to keep his expression professional when what he really wanted to do was jump up and down. "I'd be honored," he managed to say. "Excellent. Grace will work out the details with you." Alan shook Leo's hand firmly. "Welcome to the team, the full team." After Alan left, Grace beamed at Leo. "I told you he'd love your work. This is a 6-month contract minimum, possibly extending through the film's release if all goes well." "I don't know what to say," Leo admitted. "Say yes," Grace laughed, "and then go celebrate. Take the rest of the day off, you've earned it." Leo gathered his things in a daze, still processing what had just happened. 6 months of steady work. A chance to be part of a major film campaign from start to finish. It was more than he'd dared to hope for. As he walked toward the elevator, Keanu fell into step beside him. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "Your work is incredible." "Thank you," Leo said, "for everything. I wouldn't be here if not for you." Keanu shook his head. "I just made an introduction. You did the real work. They reached the elevator, and Keanu pressed the button. How's the new apartment? It's perfect, Leo said. Small, but it has great light for working, and actual walls and a door that locks. After 3 months outside, it feels like a palace. I know the feeling, Keanu said, surprising Leo. I lived out of my car for a while when I first came to LA. People don't always realize how quickly things can change, for better or worse. Leo hadn't known that about the famous actor. It created a new bond between them, a shared understanding that went beyond their brief encounters. Some of us are getting dinner tonight to celebrate the green light on the campaign, Leo said impulsively. Nothing fancy, just a few people from the marketing team. Would you want to join? I mean, I know you're probably busy. I'd like that, Keanu said simply. Text me the details. The elevator arrived and they stepped in together. As the doors closed, Leo caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished metal. Clean clothes, haircut, standing taller than he had in months. He barely recognized himself. Sometimes I think about Rick, Leo said suddenly. The waiter from the diner. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Why? Because if he hadn't been such a jerk, we never would have met, Leo explained. And none of this would have happened. It's like one of those alternate timelines in the movie. One small moment changing everything that follows. Keanu smiled. Maybe in another timeline he was kind to you and you never needed my help at all. Maybe, Leo agreed, but I'm pretty happy with how this timeline is turning out. The elevator reached the ground floor, and the doors opened to the bright Los Angeles day outside. For the first time in a long time, Leo stepped out into the sunshine without worrying about where he would sleep that night or where his next meal would come from. Instead, his mind was full of designs and ideas, color palettes and typography, and the simple joy of doing work he loved. 6 months ago, he had been a successful designer. 3 months ago, he had been homeless. Today, he was both the same person and someone entirely new, shaped by hardship but not defined by it, grateful for help but standing on his own talents. And it had all started because someone had seen him when everyone else looked away. 1 year later, Leo stood in the crowded lobby of the ArcLight Hollywood Theater, surrounded by the buzz of conversation and the flash of cameras. The premiere of Threshold was tonight, and as the lead designer for the film's marketing campaign, he had been invited to attend. He adjusted his new suit, the first he'd owned since college, and tried to look like he belonged among the industry, professionals filling the space. Nervous? Grace asked, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to Leo and clinked her glass against his. A little, Leo admitted. It's strange being on this side of things. Well, get used to it, Grace said with a smile. After the success of this campaign, everyone in the industry wants to work with you. It wasn't an exaggeration. The marketing materials Leo had designed for Threshold had generated enormous buzz online. The fragmented reflection poster had become iconic even before the film's release, inspiring fan art and countless social media discussions. The motion graphics he'd created for the trailers had been praised for their originality and emotional impact. And just yesterday, Leo had received news that his work had been nominated for a prestigious industry award. From his original 2-week contract, Leo had been extended to a full-time position at Arch Studios, working on multiple film campaigns, while still leading the Threshold marketing. His small studio apartment had been replaced by a comfortable 1-bedroom with an office space for freelance projects. The days of worrying about his next meal or where he would sleep were becoming a distant though never forgotten memory. There he is, Grace said, nodding toward the entrance where Keanu had just arrived, looking elegant in a black suit. As always, he moved with a quiet grace, stopping to sign autographs for fans behind the velvet ropes before making his way inside. Over the past year, Leo and Keanu had developed an unusual friendship. They weren't close in the traditional sense. Keanu's schedule was packed with filming and other commitments while Leo had thrown himself into rebuilding his career. But they texted occasionally, had dinner every few months, and shared a bond that didn't need constant maintenance. Keanu spotted them across the lobby and made his way over, navigating through the crowd with polite nods and brief greetings. "The man of the hour," he said, reaching Leo. "How does it feel to see your work everywhere?" "Surreal," Leo answered honestly. "Walking down Sunset Boulevard and seeing that billboard, I still can't believe it's really happening." "Believe it," Keanu said, clasping Leo's shoulder. "You earned this." An assistant appeared to usher Keanu away for photos with the cast, but he paused before leaving. "Find me after the screening," he said to Leo. "There's someone I want you to meet." The film was even better than Leo had expected. Alan Wong's direction was masterful, creating a story that balanced mind-bending science fiction with deeply human emotions, and Keanu's performance as the physicist, haunted by glimpses of his alternate lives, was subtle and moving. Leo felt a surge of pride knowing his designs had helped bring this story to audiences. During the screening, he found himself watching the faces around him as much as the screen, seeing their reactions to scenes he'd come to know through countless marketing meetings. When the credits rolled and the audience broke into enthusiastic applause, Leo joined in, feeling a part of something larger than himself. The after-party was held at a trendy rooftop bar nearby. Leo mingled awkwardly at first, still not entirely comfortable in these industry gatherings, but gradually relaxed as colleagues stopped to compliment his work. Even Alan Wong, surrounded by well-wishers, made a point of finding Leo to thank him for visualizing the soul of the film. "Leo, there you are." Keanu's voice cut through the crowd noise. He was standing near the bar with an older man in an expensive suit. "Come meet someone." Leo made his way over, curious. The man with Keanu had a shrewd, appraising look and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to making important decisions. "Leo, this is Victor Harrington, head of Platinum Pictures," Keanu said. "Victor, this is Leo Chen, the designer I was telling you about." Victor extended his hand. "Mr. Chen, your work on this campaign is remarkable. Keanu has spoken very highly of your talents." "Thank you, sir," Leo said, trying to hide his surprise. Platinum Pictures was one of the largest studios in Hollywood, known for big-budget blockbusters and prestigious award winners alike. "Victor is looking for someone to revamp the marketing approach for their upcoming slate of films," Keanu explained. "I thought you two should talk." Leo shot Keanu a quick look. Was this another act of charity? But the actor's expression revealed nothing. "We're looking to move away from the formulaic approach that's dominated the industry," Victor said. "Your work on Threshold shows exactly the kind of fresh perspective we need. Would you be interested in discussing a position as our creative director of marketing?" Leo nearly choked on his drink. Creative director? At Platinum Pictures? That was the kind of job industry veterans spent decades working toward. I'd certainly be interested in discussing it," he managed to say, maintaining his composure despite the shock. "Excellent. My assistant will contact you to set up a meeting next week." Victor handed Leo a business card before being pulled away by another conversation. As soon as he was out of earshot, Leo turned to Keanu. "Did you set that up?" "I mentioned your name," Keanu admitted. "But Victor had already noticed your work. All I did was confirm what he already suspected, that you're one of the most talented designers in the business right now." Before Leo could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the rooftop. A man was arguing loudly with the security guards, who were blocking his entry. "I just want to speak to Keanu Reeves," the man was shouting. "I know he's in there. I need to talk to him." Leo moved closer, curious despite himself. The man looked vaguely familiar, but Leo couldn't place him. Then it clicked. The slicked-back hair, the angry expression. It was Rick, the waiter from Mel's Diner, the one who had told Leo they didn't serve his kind a year ago. "I just need 5 minutes." Rick was pleading with the security guards. "Please, I lost my job because of him." Keanu had noticed too. He exchanged a look with Leo, then moved toward the entrance. "It's okay," he told the security guards. "I'll talk to him. 5 minutes." The guards reluctantly stepped aside, letting Rick onto the rooftop. He looked different than Leo remembered. His clothes were cheaper, his face thinner, his eyes holding the desperate look Leo recognized all too well. Mr. Reeves, Rick began, his anger giving way to nervousness now that he was actually face to face with the actor. You got me fired. That day at the diner after you left, they fired me. As I recall, Keanu said quietly, you were fired for discriminating against a customer. I was just following orders, Rick protested. The manager told us not to serve homeless people. But he threw me under the bus when you showed up. His voice cracked slightly. I haven't been able to find steady work since. No one wants to hire the guy who was mean to Keanu Reeves. It's all over the internet. Leo hung back, watching the exchange with mixed emotions. There was a part of him that felt Rick deserved what happened, the humiliation, the job loss, the struggle. But there was another part that remembered all too well how quickly life could spiral downward, how a single lost job could lead to a cascade of problems. Keanu seemed to be considering Rick's words carefully. What do you want from me? He finally asked. A second chance, Rick said, his voice quieter now. Just like you gave him. He gestured toward Leo, who realized with surprise that Rick recognized him despite his new clothes and haircut. I'm not asking for money or a job or anything, just if someone calls for a reference, could you maybe not say I'm a terrible person? I made a mistake. I've been paying for it for a year. Leo moved forward, standing beside Keanu. You know, I think there might be an entry-level position opening up at Arch Studios, he said, surprising himself. In the mailroom. Nothing glamorous, but it's a foot in the door. Both Keanu and Rick looked at him in surprise. Why would you help me? Rick asked suspiciously. I was awful to you. Because someone helped me when I needed it, Leo said simply. And now I'm in a position to do the same. He pulled out a business card, still a novelty having his own cards, and handed it to Rick. Call this number on Monday. Ask for Grace Lynn. Tell her Leo Chen said to give you a chance. Rick took the card, looking from it to Leo with confusion. I don't understand. Neither did I at first, Leo said. Sometimes people help you not because you deserve it, but because they see something in you worth saving. As Rick left, still clutching the business card like a lifeline, Keanu turned to Leo with a questioning look. Are you sure about that? Leo shrugged. No, but someone took a chance on me when I was at my lowest. Maybe he just needs the same. They moved to a quieter corner of the rooftop, away from the party's noise and energy. The Los Angeles skyline spread out before them, a carpet of light stretching to the horizon. Creative director at Platinum Pictures, Leo said, shaking his head in disbelief. A year ago I was sleeping in a park. Life can change quickly, Keanu said, in both directions. I know, Leo agreed. That's why I'm going to help Rick. And not just him. He hesitated, then decided to share the idea he'd been considering for weeks. I'm starting a foundation for artists experiencing homelessness, a place where they can access equipment, build portfolios, connect with potential employers. Keanu raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious. I've been saving most of what I've earned this year, Leo explained. And with this new position, well, I'll have enough to get it started. I've already talked to Doris at the library about partnering with them for the space. I'd like to contribute, Keanu said. Anonymously. Leo smiled. I thought you might say that. A server approached with fresh drinks and they turned back toward the party. Across the rooftop, Leo could see Grace chatting with Alan and other colleagues from the film. Victor Harrington was deep in conversation with studio executives. All around were people who now knew Leo's name, respected his work, saw him as a talented professional rather than a homeless person to be avoided. You know, Leo said, when Rick kicked me out of that diner, it felt like the lowest point of my life. I never could have imagined it would lead to all this. That's the thing about thresholds, Keanu replied, echoing the film's title. You never know what's waiting on the other side until you cross them. Leo raised his glass. To crossing thresholds. Keanu smiled and raised his own. And to helping others cross theirs. As they rejoined the party, Leo thought about the foundation. He was planning the lives he might help change, the talent that might be discovered and nurtured. He thought about the chain reaction that had started with a cruel comment in a diner and a simple act of kindness, how it had rippled outward in unexpected ways. And he realized that while his story had changed dramatically over the past year, it wasn't just his story anymore. It was part of something larger, a web of connections and possibilities, of second chances and new beginnings, of ordinary moments that sometimes, against all odds, lead to extraordinary changes.